Hey, Global 2 students. I'm glad to see you guys. This is obviously Mr. G. I wanted to create a video for you guys in case anyone was struggling with the information this week that you're supposed to be covering in your packets on the story of apartheid. Now, hopefully you guys have already gotten started on the work, but I was hoping that maybe if you watch this video, some of the things that I'm going to tell you about the story might fill in some of the parts that maybe you might be struggling with, or just give you some details about the story that maybe aren't in your packets. So what I'm hoping that you guys can do right now is open up your packets to page 13. This is where today's lesson, or this week's lesson, was supposed to start. And you guys are supposed to start with the definition of apartheid. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background first. We're going to go to the country of South Africa. And South Africa had been dominated by European countries for quite a while, ever since the 1600s. And the Dutch were the first to arrive in South Africa. And they would control South Africa for 150 years or so. In the late 1800s, Great Britain came down and started competing with the Dutch for control of South Africa. And that's where we have something called the Boer Wars. And in the Boer Wars, the English seized control of South Africa from the Dutch, and they became the rulers. But they wouldn't be in control of South Africa for all that long, because in the early 1900s, South Africa actually gained its independence from Great Britain, which is good, right? So you're thinking, well, this is a good thing for South Africa. The problem was, even though they gained independence, the European people that had been in South Africa for almost 200 years stayed in South Africa. So even though their countries were no longer in power in South Africa, the white European people that remained wanted to find a way so that they could continue to control and dominate South Africa for white European people and prevent black South Africans from having any sort of power over their own country. And guys, that would be the historical circumstances for what is known as apartheid. And this is what this whole story is about, is this apartheid movement and the anti-apartheid movement against it. The apartheid movement, these laws that are created by the white minority government in South Africa, are meant to separate. That's where that phrase comes from, apartheid, to bring apart, to separate the races in South Africa. And that's what you guys are supposed to be looking at here to sort of start these first few pages, is this concept of separateness or apart. White European people realize if they can separate the races in South Africa, it's easier to control those races. Because what you can do is you can limit the rights and power of certain races and give other races, white people, right, white European people, all of the power and all of the rights. So even though South Africa has gained its independence, white European people can continue to dominate that country for as long as possible. And that's where these apartheid laws come from. And that's what you guys were supposed to do with this first page, is sort of get the definition of apartheid. And after you get the definition of apartheid, then you were supposed to look at some of the ways that the white minority government is going to control South Africans, black South Africans. And one of the things that they do is they create these pass laws, okay? It basically required anyone that was not of white European descent to carry around what looked like they're calling passbooks, but what they really are is basically like a passport to travel in your own country. Because what they wanted to do was limit the movement of black South Africans. You guys know that there's power in movement, being able to go where you want and do the things you want and go to the schools you want in different areas and colleges and different. If you limit the movement of people, you limit their opportunities for advancement. These pass laws allowed the white South African government, that minority government, which by the way is going to be known as the National Party, to control the movement of black South Africans and ultimately limit their opportunities and their power. Speaking of limiting their opportunities, we also have these Bantu homelands. The white minority government is going to establish certain areas of South Africa specifically for black South Africans, limiting the areas that they can live in. Now, you guys know how this is going to work. Because they limit the areas that they can live in, they're going to make sure that they give Black South Africans the pieces of land that they basically don't want. All right, the sort of most useless, smaller areas of South Africa, so that the white European people that remain in South Africa can continue to have the majority of the land, and not just the land itself, but the good land, the land that is most useful in South Africa. Along with those Bantu homelands, you also have the forced removals. All right, once these homelands are established for Black South Africans, then the white minority government, the National Party, will remove Black South Africans from wherever they currently lived and force them onto these basically reservations, these homelands that are designated for them. So you kind of get an idea of how apartheid works. Now, is apartheid a human rights violation? Yes, obviously, right? Limiting somebody's rights based on the color of their skin or their ethnicity is absolutely a human rights violation, right? It totally goes against things like equality and liberty and freedom. Again, the ability to move as you want and gain education and job opportunities. The fact that you're limiting those based on the color of somebody's skin is absolutely a human rights violation. So we know that when these human rights violations happen in history, people will work to end these violations. And that's where on page 18, we first meet Nelson Mandela, okay? The rest of the story is going to focus on him, all right? Nelson Mandela is going to join an organization known as the ANC, the African National Congress. And the African National Congress is going to be the political party that basically promotes the idea of rights for Black South Africans, okay? The ANC is looking to put an end to the Apartheid laws. And Nelson Mandela, as a young man, will join that organization. And because he is so intelligent, will very quickly rise up in that organization and become one of its most prominent members. Now, Nelson Mandela initially wants to use nonviolent tactics, okay? Should remind us of somebody like Gandhi, right? And wants to use these nonviolent tactics. But as time goes by and he doesn't see a whole lot of progress, Nelson Mandela will start to explore some maybe more violent tactics, really trying to push this change, fight for rights for Black South Africans. As he starts plotting against the white minority government, that National Party, Nelson Mandela will be arrested because he will be found to be involved in basically what are terrorist activities, right? An attempt to overthrow or use violence against his own government. Nelson Mandela is going to be put on trial for plotting these terrorist acts. And that's where on page 20, by the way, if you haven't read this, this is really, really powerful stuff. When Nelson Mandela is in his trial, he's going to give this pretty famous speech, and it's really this last line that kind of captures who he is as a person. I'll just read it to you guys real quick. This last part says, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities," right? Almost sort of sounds like Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream speech, right? I cherish this idea, this vision that I have of a free and democratic society. People of all backgrounds and races can live together in harmony. But then the next line, "It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Nelson Mandela is willing to give his life to end the apartheid laws, to end this human rights violation. Now, he's going to be convicted. He's going to be put in prison in a place called Robben Island. Okay, Robben Island is an island about 6 miles off the coast of South Africa, out in the ocean. The white minority government, that National Party, what they're looking to do is remove Nelson Mandela from people's sight, but also anything that he has to say, his message is to block that out from the people too, what they can hear and what they can see of Nelson Mandela. And if they make Nelson Mandela disappear, then the white minority government believes that this movement will end and the anti-apartheid movement will come to an end because their leader is gone and he's disappeared. That doesn't happen. Even though Nelson Mandela is going to spend the next 27 years in prison, the longer he spends in prison, the more he becomes a symbol of the anti-apartheid movement. And his popularity actually grows, and not just in South Africa, but around the world. He will become a world figure fighting for what is right, freedom and equality for Black South Africans. While remaining in prison, of course, the anti-apartheid movement will continue. And it continues through the 1960s and 1970s, and it's still going. These apartheid laws are still going, but it's really in the 1980s when things finally start. We start to finally see some movement on this, right? The idea that apartheid maybe can be brought down. And really the big thing that's going to be done, and it's here on page 22, is something called economic sanctions. Other countries who are against apartheid, who see what's happening in South Africa, know that it's wrong. Other countries can do something to show their displeasure with the apartheid laws. And basically what you can do is you can tell the South African government, this white minority government, we're not going to trade with you anymore. We're not going to invest in your South African businesses until you end the apartheid laws and you release Nelson Mandela from prison. And that's the idea of these economic sanctions. Now, somebody like Desmond Tutu, who's on the previous page, Desmond Tutu was one of the leaders in South Africa who promoted this idea, who told other countries, put sanctions on South Africa. Give them the ultimatum where you say, we're not going to give you any more of our money, any more of our business, any more of our investments, any more of our trade until you do what's right. And that's really what a sanction is. It's to put economic pressure on a country to do what's right, right? To give them an ultimatum so that they ultimately will, in this case, make the right decision and end the apartheid laws. So the United Nations is on board with this. Even countries like the United States, like us, right? In the 1980s, we put pressure on South Africa and basically said, we're not going to trade with you anymore. And what this does is it starts to sort of shake the economy of South Africa. And the white minority government in South Africa realizes this, that they are in a really bad spot and they need to do something under this pressure that they ultimately don't have a choice. The guy who's the leader of this white national government here in South Africa is F.W. de Klerk. Now, this is a name you guys are going to want to know for the Regents exam. F.W. de Klerk, the leader of the white minority government, he's going to be the one that finally says, we have to give in to this pressure. And F.W. de Klerk is going to start to ease up on the apartheid laws. And as he's easing the apartheid laws, is also when, through some negotiations, Nelson Mandela will be released from prison. All right, so this is a huge moment in South African history, major, major turning point. Nelson Mandela is going to be released from prison. F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela will actually both win the Nobel Peace Prize for ending this human rights violation. Along with that, they're going to write a new constitution for South Africa together. And one of the biggest things, besides, issuing all these rights that black South Africans should have had from the beginning, is going to issue maybe the most important right that you can have in a government, and that is the right to vote, right? If South Africa is a true democracy, then all citizens should have the right to vote. In this new constitution, that is a piece that will be put in there, that black South Africans, for the first time in the history of their country, will get to take part in the democratic process of voting. And the upcoming election is the 1994 election. And I bet you guys can probably figure out what's going to happen. The most prominent black South African figure at this time will be elected the first black president of South Africa. And you guys know that's Nelson Mandela. So after he's released from prison, Nelson Mandela becomes the first black president of South Africa in their history. Black South Africans would stand in line for hours and hours and hours to get the chance to vote in this election. You can see them here in lines, hours and hours. Some people even spent half a day, a full day, standing in line just to have the ability to vote and to have their voice heard for the first time ever. And it works. Nelson Mandela is going to be elected as the president. As soon as he's elected president, he gives this inauguration speech where he talks about forgiveness, that he's not angry that he spent 27 years in prison, that he doesn't want to punish white South Africans for what they've done for so many years, that it's time to move forward. as equals, black and white South Africans side by side with the same rights and same opportunities, and to build this new South Africa together. It's a beautiful idea. But you guys know you can't just snap your fingers and have it happen just that easy. And that's sort of where the note package finishes for this week. If you look at South Africa since the end of apartheid, while black South Africans were able to gain political equality, the right to vote, economic opportunities, and opportunities in education are still unequal in South Africa. You can look at this diagram here. Now, again, this is from 1991. This is when the Apartheid Laws ended. And you can still see that in South Africa, even though the Apartheid Laws don't exist anymore, that there's still this inequality in land distribution and in income. Nelson Mandela will speak on that, and this is basically what he says, and this is the next page, this political cartoon here. It says, after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. Nelson Mandela was able to walk this path, right, to end apartheid, to gain freedom for himself and black South Africans. But on the other side of this hill is just another hill to climb, right? And at the top of that one, it says reconstruction. If you are going to rebuild South Africa to make it truly free and truly equal for all races in South Africa, the job is not over here. There are more hills to climb in South Africa. And guys, just so you know, even now it's 2020. In South Africa, they're still experiencing a lot of this inequality. The hate, right? The underlying hate, the roots of hatred and racism and discrimination that existed in South Africa ever since colonial times, right? Ever since the Dutch first arrived back in the 1600s, those things don't just disappear, unfortunately, at the snap of your fingers. This is something that's going to take time. And South Africa is still in a position where if you were to go there today, what you would notice is there are certain areas of South Africa that are doing really, really well. Major industrialized cities, enormous amounts of wealth, right? But what you'd notice in those places is that white South Africans still have the highest standard of living as opposed to black South Africans. Still have access to the best education systems as opposed to black South Africans. So there's still a lot of work to do as far as equality in South Africa. Steps have been taken. You know, apartheid laws ended. Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa. And that human rights violation ended. But the job in South Africa is not over with yet. All right, hatred, discrimination, racism, unfortunately, those are things that have a lasting legacy. And it's still going to take some time for South Africa to work itself through that. Guys, I hope this helped. You guys know that myself, Mrs. Lester, Miss Grigliano, Mr. Monaco, we are here for you guys. If you need any help, you can send us emails. You can try to get a hold of us, and we, of course, will be here to try to support you guys any way that we can. If you like this video, maybe email your teachers. Let them know that you think this helped. If it didn't help, you can email them that too and just say, I didn't really need this. The more feedback we can get from you guys, the better. Keep up on the assignments in your packet, okay? Keep up on those assignments on teams. We're proud of you guys for trying to do this work independently. We know this is not a situation that we necessarily wanted to be in, but we can do this together, even though we're not in the same classroom together right now, okay? So you guys keep working hard, keep in touch, stay safe, wash those hands, and if you guys think this helped, we'll continue to try to post these videos to help you guys out. All right, we'll talk to you soon.